Mack, what are you doing this week to save America?
Well, the same thing I was doing last week, and the same thing I was doing 10 years ago, and the same thing I was doing 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And that is trying to educate public officials, especially sheriffs and the American people, that we must join together in restoring our God given sacred Constitution as the supreme law of the land.
Mhm.
And with that, in concert with that, to make sure that we are saving America from the destruction from within. Abraham Lincoln warned us that
Mm.
if we ever lost our freedoms, it would be because we destroyed ourselves. And indeed, the present administration is allowing our enemies to infiltrate our country with his ridiculous and uh, treasonous uh, open border policy, just so they can put more Democrats on the voter rolls. And this is so obvious that it's, they can't even deny that anymore. But with that, we're trying to make sure that we're recognizing the danger from within, and that we, as Madison said, erect the barriers against the encroachments of the national authority.
Mm.
And so we are doing that. And I believe that this is culminating, everything I just said culminates down to one thing. We take America back county by county, and hopefully state by state, but definitely county by county, with the sheriffs working with their people, and the people helping form posses to help
Mm.
erect those barriers that Madison warned us about.
Speaking of which, forming posses, I remind me, and I didn't prepare this on my notes for this, but you just sparked that memory. Where did I read recently where a local sheriff was suggesting to the people, "Look, it's getting a little crazy out there. Do
Yeah.
just exactly what you just said. Not necessarily in a militia style, but at least for the people to get educated and get trained and ready to defend our natural God given rights."
Well, I noticed another sheriff talking about posses just recently
Hmm.
in the news, and he said just 90% of the sheriffs already use posses. Some of them don't realize it, that they are posses. So anytime you have volunteers helping at the sheriff's office, that's a posse. And so what I've said the exact same thing, and I've mentioned one posse that most sheriffs do use, and that's the search and rescue squad. Most search and rescue
Mm.
squads are volunteers who are very well trained and used and utilized just as the sheriff wants. It's totally up to him. So again, with any posse that he were to allow to take hold in his county,
Mhm.
it's up to him how well they're trained. It's up to him how they're utilized, and what part they play in securing the peace in his county. It's totally up to him.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, you've been doing this for 20, close to, well, 30 years.
Yes.
Let's go back to the 1900s for just a moment. Um, Prince versus United States. Give me a little summary of capsulate. What was the case there? You sued the Clinton administration. You were victorious and survived.
Yeah, no kidding. I
Yeah.
sued the Clintons and lived to tell about it.
Mm.
So this is the thing. It bears the name of Sheriff Prince.
Mhm.
Both of us are mentioned inside of it, and ironically, I was the primary litigant in that case.
Mhm.
But because I was the first one that filed, and I've kept the case going ever since. And Prince and I are very good friends. I absolutely love him.
Mhm.
It was one of the happiest days of my life when I heard on the news, when I was driving to work as sheriff in Southeast Arizona, that he also filed the case. I thought I was going to be all by myself the whole
Right.
time. And I was so grateful that he did. And he and I instantly became friends. And we met on the Phil Donahue show in New York City in May of 1994.
Wow.
That was the first time he and I ever met in person. But I don't care whose name is on
Right.
the case, or if it's called the Mack case or Prince case or Mack Prince. He and I were consolidated at one time because we're in the same circuit. So when he and I filing this lawsuit against the Clinton administration, We lost. We won at the district court, but he and I were overturned at the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco, the most
Surprise.
overturned court in the country. But this was such a miracle.
Mm.
This was two small town sheriffs taking on the Goliath federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first time in history that this has ever happened, where sheriffs sued the federal government, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and won.
Wow.
This is the only time in history. And it's also the only time in history where Congress and the president promulgated legislation that required the sheriffs to enforce federal law. And not only that, it was gun control. It was known as the Brady Bill. And it was the first time in history, here I go saying that again. It was the first time in history where they threatened to arrest the sheriffs if we failed to comply with their unconstitutional mandate and order. And so, of course, we sued. What I'm still baffled about is that only 7 sheriffs did this lawsuit nationwide. Out of 3,100 sheriffs, 7 did it. But we changed American history. And ever since then, ever since we won, June 27 will be our 27-year anniversary of this tremendous victory. And I have a copy of it right here. What I did is I put this book, little tiny booklet, fits right in your pocket. It's very small. You should keep the pocket constitution and this with you everywhere you go.
Yes.
It's Supreme Court case for state sovereignty. And I studied the case. Amazing. I put an amazing amount of time, and I put all the most important parts from the case in this little booklet. So if you and any of your listeners, you should get this. I'm not telling you, I'm ordering you. Okay. Do any of you take orders? Good. I'll have a ham and cheese on rye while you order these off my website.
Yeah.
Because this is such a miraculous tool, and you need to show this to other local officials in your county, in your cities, and friends of yours, your freedom groups, all need to see this. It's the most powerful 10th Amendment decision in American history, and it protects state sovereignty. And it says, but the Constitution protects us from our own best intentions. Well, it doesn't if we don't enforce it.
Yes.
So we've got to get busy, and this is a great freedom tool to help us with our movement, with our freedom movement, to restore our Constitution as the supreme law of the land.
Amen. So, well, wait a minute. Help me understand here. The Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, says the federal government's supreme in everything it does, doesn't it? And you sheriffs, don't you report to the federal government?
Who have you been talking to?
Well, public schools, sorry.
Yeah, public schools for sure. Mary McCord, who is a professor at some Georgetown University or something, and she's been an activist for some time. She goes, well, she was bad-mouthing me and Prince and the whole case. And she goes, Sheriff Mack doesn't understand his own case, and he makes more out of it. It was really a very broad statement by the Supreme Court, Justice Scalia, who wrote it. And then she said this: the Supremacy Clause is very clear that the federal government has supreme authority.
In pursuance thereof.
Yeah, but and she left that part out.
Yeah, of course.
So Scalia, in his decision, talks about the Supremacy Clause. And he makes it very clear that the dissent, he's talking about the 4 Democrats that disagreed with this decision. The dissent perceives a simple answer in that Article 6, which requires that all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. And then he goes, of course, the Supremacy Clause, he says, however, makes law of the land, and then I add a word, only.
Yes.
Okay. And then I go back to quoting Scalia, laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance of the Constitution.
Yes.
And so that's what Scalia wrote. And he says, so if we take the supremacy clause, it says whether laws conscripting state officers violate state sovereignty and thus not in accord with the Constitution. So he said the supremacy clause merely brings us back to the, can the federal
Right.
government, do they have the authority to tell us what to do? And in this, it's obvious we are not. And let me quote Scalia again. We have held, however, that state legislatures are not subject to federal direction. The states are not subject to
Right.
federal direction.
Yeah, don't you find it fascinating when they pass some law and then some federal law, this federal law allows the states to wait a minute, allows the states? Who's
Oh,
the parent? Who's the
thank you,
child?
King.
Yeah.
Thank you, King. Thank you, Master.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. You're the child. You're not the parent.
Okay, well, historically,
Yeah.
we need to tell Mary McCord and a few of these other people, these anti-American, anti-Constitution people that are out there.
Yes.
Maybe you ought to read history.
Right.
The Constitutional Convention of 1787, maybe you should look that over.
Right.
Because it was the states
Yes.
that formed the federal government.
Right. Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. And we assigned you certain limited, discrete powers. And Scalia brings that up in this decision. So he says the federal, this is such an amazing decision. But he goes, residual state sovereignty was also implicit, of course, in the Constitution's conferral upon Congress of not all governmental powers.
Right.
Well, then what kind did they have? Well, he says it, but only discrete, enumerated ones.
Yes.
In other words, you can number them. You can go in the Constitution and you can number them. Then, if the federal government wants to aggrandize their own authority and their own power, what must they do? Refer to the 10th Amendment. And that's where the states come in. We are the government entity that must enforce the 10th Amendment. All the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people.
Correct.
And that's why the states have fallen so short in this assignment, because this is even crazier. The states send all this money to Washington, D.C., very stupidly and ignorantly.
Yeah.
And then they beg and grovel for them to send back 5%.
Yes. Little off the top, right? For the big guy.
And then we think that's a great way to work. And then we totally acquiesce and say, oh, thank you, Master. Thank you, King in Washington, D.C., for sending us all this money to run our education.
Yeah.
You should run your own education and stop sending all the money to Washington, D.C. so they can bribe you with your own money.
And then when they hire the company to build the road right in front of you, with the 5%, they hire some local business anyways. Why are we sending it there? A little off the top for the big guy. Now you're getting me started.
It is so messed up. It is so stupid, and it is so corrupt. And I will tell you this. This is a little bit of a biblical term here. But if God doesn't strike down Washington, D.C., he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology.
Oh, don't turn back. Pillar of salt.
Yeah. It's absolutely true.
Is it any wonder we send our kids to government schools and they come out not knowing anything about the government and how it's supposed to operate?
Except we're supposed to worship them.
Right. Right. You were talking about the enumerator powers. Start with Article 1, Section 8. Let's just go through those 8, not now, but go through those 18. Let's learn about what they're supposed to be doing. 10th Amendment says if it's a responsibility not given to them here in this Constitution, then it's up to the states or the people who reserve those rights. I always say, I don't have constitutional rights. I have constitutional protections. Correct. I don't get my rights from the Constitution.
Correct.
Right. The government has constitutional rights.
Yeah.
Let's talk about for a moment.
As you've seen, though, this is quite the miraculous decision. It even talks about the crisis of the day, that government uses the crisis of the day to destroy the Constitution.
Yes.
And folks, get this booklet. And while you're at it, go to cspoa.org to get this booklet. And then my other book, I have several books, but the biggest seller is The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope. So get a number of these, and then get a few of those and pass them around. And you need to read them first so that you're right on topic when you're discussing this with your sheriff and other local officials. Remember, the solution is sheriffs, local officials, county by county.
Mhm.
We take America back, and we need those counties to get busy and doing it now.
What has the reception been throughout the land talking to sheriffs? How many do they get it? Have you had some pushback or?
There's a lot of traditional ignorance
Mm,
that they're part of, and I don't blame them for it because I was there once. I was in law enforcement 20 years. When I was a rookie cop, I was all for that. I mean, hey, I'm supposed to write tickets, and I'm supposed to arrest drunk drivers, and we're supposed to run our DUI checkpoints, and we're supposed to kick in doors, and yeah, we wanted to protect people, but still, the traditional methodologies that we employ uh, are perfect, and we don't need to change anything. And the problem is, uh, we've been taught to ignore the Constitution.
mhm.
We've been studying case law instead of
Yes.
the law of the land.
Yes.
And we each take an oath of office required by Article 6 that you alluded to.
Mhm.
Do we keep it?
Mhm.
Do we understand the significance of our role in protecting our constitutional republic? And what we're really supposed to be doing out there is protecting God given liberties. Civil rights is our duty. And all the numbers of writing tickets and making arrests, yeah, some of that is part of our job, but we don't understand the real significance of our job is liberty and Constitution as we promised
Right.
when we took our job.
And I like the fact that your CSPOA.org, CSPOA.org has constitutional sheriffs and peace officers. How do you define the difference? Because I love the fact that you keep the term peace. They're supposed to keep the peace by protecting people's rights.
Well, sheriffs are peace officers, and they're supposed to be, and they're the epitome of a peace officer, and
Mhm.
and they're supposed to keep the peace. And if they need to call their posses out to help them keep the peace, they are allowed to do that, and they have that prerogative. But some peace officers forget that, and you have to look at the chiefs of police.
Mm,
They should be peace officers as well, and they should be working in tandem with the sheriff to erect these barriers and to save our Constitution. And because the chiefs, answer to the town manager
right.
or the city council or some other committee, they're bureaucrats,
Yes.
and the sheriff answers only. Now, get this, folks. The sheriff has one boss,
Mm,
and it's not the county attorney, and it's not the county commissioners, and it's not the governor, and it's not the president. He answers only to you. You are his only supervisor. You are his only boss.
yeah.
And every 4 years, you have the power to determine if he's been doing a good job and if you're going to keep him. This is we the people. This is our constitutional republic in
Yeah.
action. We are not a democracy. We
Amen.
are a republic. And that republic is built on the power of the people of this country.
And that's why you say the constitutional sheriffs are the last line of defense because they are the ones that are closest to the people and elected by the people to defend and protect
Correct.
the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Yeah. So when this first really got on my radar was a number of years ago. I remember reading a story in Elkhart, Indiana.
Brad
Elkhart,
Rogers.
yes, sir. Yeah, and that was, like, so interesting to me where the local sheriff was telling the FDA saying, "Look, if you're, you know, if you're gonna come onto his property to do this raid or whatever it was, inspection, then you're gonna meet my deputies there." And I
Right.
remember the response back from the FDA saying the same thing, "Supremacy clause, we're supreme, blah, blah, blah." But the sheriff did a great job. Tell me more about that story.
Well, I worked with Sheriff Rogers on that quite a bit, who is now a county commissioner.
No, that's
And
awesome.
I told him, I said, Brad, you win everything you run for. Run for governor.
Right.
So
Yeah.
anyway, he's a very dear friend. But an Amish farmer by the name of David Hostetler kept getting raided by the no, not raided. I'm sorry,
Oh,
spot inspections.
right.
Spot inspections, but they were happening every month, sometimes even more. And it's like they were getting mad because they never found anything wrong. And we're going to find something wrong with this place. They have no authority to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
That the federal government oversees and manages and regulates every ranch and farm in this country. Are you kidding?
Right.
That's ridiculous. And so, anyway, they kept coming back, and finally, they gave him papers to take him before a grand jury in Detroit. And so
This is in
now,
Indiana.
yes, Indiana to Michigan. So yeah, and how was he supposed to get there? So he finally got tired of it, and he called me, and I said, "Hey, your sheriff just had our training, and he knows this, and he's a good man. You get a hold of your sheriff." And he did, and Sheriff Rogers went and met with him, and the farmer says, "I'm tired of this." And Brad said, "I'm going to do something about this." And he asked Hostetler, "Are you with me?" And he goes, "Absolutely. I am so tired of this."
Yeah.
And so the Amish being so passive wasn't so passive this time. And so Brad sent a warning to the FDA and to the U.S. Marshals and to Congress or somebody else. There was 3 different people, U.S. Attorney's Office. And he told them, if you come back to my county without, if they just don't have probable cause, duly signed warrants, and due process.
Signed by a local judge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember that in the
I don't
article.
know if he even said it had to be a local judge, but he said it had to be duly signed warrants and search warrants and all that. And he says, if you come back here without that, I will arrest you for trespassing. Ha! Boy,
Wow.
did they get mad.
Yeah.
And so I have all this documentation. I still have the letter. And then Brad and I, Sheriff Rogers and I, prepared a letter back to them because they responded and they threatened to arrest Sheriff Rogers for a 3-year sentence. They said 3-year sentence on a felony for you obstructing justice that we're trying to do here.
Right.
And so they, and it was an attorney by the name of Goldstein who wrote back to us and said, the supremacy clause is clear that the United States Constitution and the laws of this land shall be supreme. Do you know what he did? Right when he was supposed to put in pursuance thereof, he put ...
Oh, wow.
He left it out. He left the part out where they had to follow the Constitution.
Inconvenient for them, right?
So we had a field day telling him he left that out. And we also quoted the Prince case, the Lopez decision, the Bond decision, and New York v.U.S. that happened in 1992. That's also quoted in Scalia's decision in the Prince case here. And so then the miracle happened. I believe that we confronted them to the extent that they couldn't get out of it.
Right.
And they wrote back a certified letter to Mr. Hostetler telling him that everything against him had been dropped. No more grand jury, no more inspections, and they haven't been back to bother any of the Amish there for over 12 years now.
Wow. But now they're over with, was it Amos Miller in Pennsylvania, right? Is that a similar situation, I assume?
It is. It is. And we've been trying to help him, and he's got a good lawyer now, and Amos Miller isn't rolling over for him.
Right.
And we really appreciate for you that you've got to hear. This is the tale of 2 cities, the tale of 2 sheriffs. A sheriff in Tampa, Florida, arrested Pastor Rodney Howard Brown for having church. Yeah. Just for having church. He's got a mega church. I've been out there. I've seen him. I've met some of the students. They fed us an amazing meal right there at his church facilities, in the cafeteria, of course. And I became very good friends with Pastor Brown. This sheriff bragged about arresting this good man, good pastor for having church.
Wow.
You would think that the First Amendment would be very clear on that. But you know how the insanity of the COVID-19 mandates won out on this particular time, except not with Sheriff Hamilton in New Mexico. And Pastor Caleb Cooper went to his sheriff and said, I'm not going to shut down. The state is telling me I have to shut down. I'm not going to, and I want to know what you're going to do to protect me.
Right.
And the sheriff said, this is Sheriff Glenn Hamilton. And he said, if I have to go to jail myself, I will stand in the way and make sure that your right to have your church will be protected. And so they came, and Sheriff Hamilton deputized about half the people in that church.
Wow.
And when they came, he just simply told them, we're having a sheriff's office meeting in here. These people all are part of my posse. I've deputized them. They're with me. You're not coming in. Go home.
Who did they send?
The state police.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And
Wow.
so nothing ever happened. And Pastor Caleb Cooper stayed open every Sunday, did not miss a single Sunday.
Amen.
Because you know why? A sheriff and a pastor together, they call themselves the Sheriff Shepherd Show.
Mhm.
And we just had them speak at one of our conferences. See, this is the type of thing we do at the CSPOA, folks. And I want to ask you right now.
Yeah.
Sheriff Hamilton has been with us for a long time. Which sheriff do you want in your county? This does not happen by happen chance. This is not an accident.
Mhm.
This is a sheriff who studied the Constitution.
Yeah.
This is a sheriff who has learned about our case. This is a sheriff who's been to our training more than once. He's been to Chris Ann Hall's training.
Mhm.
And so, folks, the work that we're doing to train sheriffs and other peace officers across this country and public officials, we love county commissioners being part of this. We love the very few humble county attorneys and DAs to hear about this. Wouldn't every sheriff and DA be interested in this case?
Mhm.
Should they not be enforcing this case? And so we present that to the American people. And folks, if you're not part of the solution, then what are you a part of?
Yes.
And you have to be part of the holy cause of liberty to make sure we take back our Constitution and revive America, because she's on her deathbed. And folks, restoring her and reviving her is the holy cause of liberty that you have to be a part of. If you're not,
Right.
then we get what we get. And
Yes.
what we have right now is the most dangerous time in American history.
You know, I often talk about, or actually, people talk often about where they live. Do they live in a safe neighborhood? And I would offer, it's not just do you live in a safe neighborhood because of crime, but also do you trust a jury of your peers?
Right.
My first book, I did a deep dive on how independent grand juries are really supposed to operate based on the presentment within the Fifth Amendment, and long story on that. But I would even expand that based on this: is do you live in a county where the sheriff actually understands their duty to protect you? And we've seen across the country where different counties consider themselves Second Amendment sanctuary counties, and there's a lot of sheriffs that have stood up and said, "I'm not enforcing that red flag law in my county."
Right.
One of my clients, I publish and print the pocket constitutions for Sheriff Steve Reams in Weld County, Colorado, who stood up years ago saying, "I'm not going to enforce red flag laws." And even here where I am, the local county said in Illinois said that they're not going to enforce Governor Pritzker's recent
Gun control laws in Chicago.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
crazy. Absolutely. And I'm not in Chicago. I'm in the red part of the state that subsidizes Chicago. But
Very-
one of the last lines here is election fraud. It's such a big issue, and there are a number of. I encourage people to, in their local areas, go to if you see any issues, encourage your sheriff to open up an investigation. There are some sheriffs that are doing it. Sheriff Darleaf in Michigan. Can you tell a little bit about that and how sheriffs can actually help protect
yeah.
our elections?
We have made that one of our top priorities at the CSPOA.
Good.
And we've been working with True the Vote to make sure
Excellent.
that sheriffs are getting trained to recognize and try to prevent the cheating.
Mm-hmm.
And folks, we're actually trying to put together a national conference to reinforce that in September, to make sure that the sheriffs are ready for two things: the violence that happens when or if, and I hope it's when Trump wins re-election.
Mm-hmm.
The violence that will be subsequent to that will be the worst we've ever seen in American history, probably since the Civil War, and maybe as bad. So we've got to build our defenses there and be prepared. And then we've got to be prepared also to have these sheriffs monitoring the computers and the election process as it's presently constituted. It guarantees
Mhm.
cheating. It
Mhm.
guarantees fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a
But
system they put together wittingly. They know what they're doing, and this has been going on for some time, actually.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And you're talking about September. You're trying to do an event. I've known Catherine Engelbrecht and her team for many years, since the Tea Party
Yeah,
days.
we work closely with Greg and Catherine, and we actually helped get them out of prison when the judge threw them in jail
Yeah.
for again no crime. They
Right.
had committed no crime
Gotta give
whatsoever.
give up your sources or
Yeah,
else.
yeah,
Really. It's just
yeah.
what world is this?
And we talk a lot about Martin Luther King and civil rights, and we talk about Rosa Parks. And so I want to ask every cop and every sheriff in this country if if you were called back into time to December 1st, 1955,
Mm.
when Rosa Parks was arrested by cops, by peace officers who've sworn oaths to uphold and defend the Constitution, knowing what we know now about equality and our Constitution and civil rights, would you have arrested Rosa Parks?
Mm.
Then why do you do it today to gun owners,
Yes.
to Catholics, to Christians? Why are we going after people who question elections? FBI knocks on the door of two mothers in Utah who simply wanted to know how the voting went in 3 counties in Utah.
Mm.
So the FBI knocks on their door. You know what, folks? The FBI can no longer be trusted. We have to trust the sheriff who works for us, and we can stop all this, but we've got to have more sheriffs on board.
But Sheriff Mack, I'm just doing my job. That's the quote that you hear all the time.
Oh, the Nuremberg defense,
Oh,
just following orders.
right.
Yeah.
But
Sorry. The number one order that you have is the one you gave to God Almighty and to the people you work for when you swore an oath in God's name to uphold and defend the Constitution and to protect the people you work for.
amen. Last question. I've been following for a number of years different organizations that have raised the awareness about civil asset forfeiture. I don't
Oh,
know if you followed that, but how multiple agencies will participate
I
in a
campaigned
raid.
against civil asset forfeiture a great deal. It is a
Oh,
horrible abuse by our law enforcement. I've told sheriffs, how can any of you do that when you know darn well it's a conflict of interest for you to take money from people
yes,
that you haven't even arrested
right.
and you put the money in the departmental budget? That is a crime. That is illegal.
It's theft. Of course, they name it civil asset forfeiture. I didn't forfeit it. You took it. It's
No, you
theft. And it
took it.
wasn't civil, it was uncivil.
I'm all for that after a conviction. If you can prove
Right,
that they got assets from the crimes they committed, they don't get to keep the fruits of their crime.
right.
However, doing it before conviction is illegal.
And you're seeing these cases where, like Institute for Justice and these others, where for multiple years they're trying to get their money back and they finally do. There's no apology, there's no interest. Can I put interest and penalties on that? I mean, you held my money for that long.
They should, and then by the time they pay their attorneys, it's all but gone
Oh,
anyway.
right, right.
And
The fund
they should get attorney fees, interest, and
yeah,
and punitive penalties.
yes. It's the bar it's the Bar Association funding both sides of the war, making money on
That's
anyways.
true. Yeah,
Oh,
the
man.
only winners, both sides, are the attorneys.
Right. Sheriff Mack, I truly appreciate you and consider me today your newest member of the CSPOA. Go to cspoa.org. I'll be joining today. And thank you so much for all that you do to defend our natural God given rights and our constitutional protections.
Well, thank you, and God bless the sheriffs like Dar Leaf and Bob Songer and
Mhm.
the many others that are standing for the Constitution and keeping their word to uphold and defend the Constitution. God bless America, and God bless each and every one of you. Please join us in this holy cause. Join us in this cause of liberty.
Amen. God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
This segment brought to you by the Remembrance Project, theremembranceproject.org.